I'm Barb. Hi, everyone. I'm Barb Cardell, and welcome to Moving Advocates Up the Leadership Ladder. Before we go ahead and get started, we are going to have an explanation of our Spanish language interpretation from Jose. And Jose, there's your slides.
Thanks, Barb. Gracias, Barb. Buenas a todos. Hello, y'all. This call includes interpretation into English and Spanish simultaneously. Esta llamada brinda interpretación al inglés y español simultánea. To access the interpretation, if you're joining from a computer, just click the globe that you'll see circled on the slide on the screen right now. Select the language in which you'd like to participate, and then you should be good to go. Si se está uniendo a través de una computadora, todo lo que tienen que hacer es seleccionar el globo terráqueo que ven al fondo de la pantalla y luego seleccionar el canal de audio en cual les gustaría participar. If you're joining from a cell phone, it's a little bit different. Just click the 3 little dots that you'll see in a corner of your phone and then select more or click language interpretation if that pops up for you, and then select the language channel and remember to click done. Si se está uniendo a través de un celular, busca unos 3 puntitos que están por ahí en una esquina, selecciona más o donde dice interpretación de idiomas y luego selecciona el idioma en cual le gustaría participar y recuérdese de seleccionar finalizado. You also have the option to mute the original audio so that you only hear the interpretation. También tienen la opción de silenciar el audio original para solamente oír la interpretación. Just a reminder to please speak slowly for the interpretation and enjoy the session. Nomás un recordatorio de por favor hablar lentamente y de disfrutar de su sesión. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Tammy, to manage the interpretation and turn it on. Gracias por estar aquí.
Hey, why is the freezer still open? Ethan, what are you getting out here?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are going to ask that if you are not presenting, if you could go ahead and mute yourself, that would be great. We are going to be recording and we're translating as well as Spanish.
Sorry, Barb, I just muted everyone. I have you unmuted now. Apologize for that.
Yep, not to worry. Thank you. As we were saying, indeed, we have a lot of people on today. Welcome. But we're going to ask everybody if you can just go ahead and mute yourself and type any questions you have into the chat box. That would be great, so that we can go ahead and get as good a recording as possible to be able to share with people who are on another session or maybe who aren't able to join us. This meeting is being recorded. We are in meeting mode, so if you want to mute yourself, it's *6 or just hit the mute button. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box. Malcolm, our moderator, is going to keep track of them. And if there are any questions that are coming up consistently, we'll go ahead and he'll let us know and we'll answer them in the moment, but we also have a chance to answer questions at the end. So welcome, my name is Barb Cardell. I am the PWN USA Training Director. I use they, them, their pronouns. Ebony, would you like to introduce yourself?
And I am Ebony Turk, PWN National Field Organizer, and I use she, her pronouns.
Great, so thank you everyone for joining us today. This session is called Moving Advocates Up the Leadership Ladder. Before we start, we want to just go ahead and give people a little bit of information about PWN, seeing as Ebony and I and so many folks that we're seeing here are with PWN. So it is the only national membership body created by and for women living with HIV, transgender and gender diverse folks living with HIV in the United States. We were founded in 2008 by 28 diverse people, and ranging from the age of 18 to 73. We had differently abled folks. We had folks who did not speak Spanish or speak English as a first language. We really tried to, in 2008, bring as many people together as possible. And it looks like, looking at the list of participants, we might actually even have a couple of founding members who have joined us. So PWN is a unique group, and we like to talk a little bit about who we are because oftentimes people have heard of us and have seen us, but don't quite understand that in all of our work that we do, we seek to create a unified voice and to build collective power and to prepare and involve women living with HIV in all decision-making bodies, all policies that are going to impact our lives. We apply a racial and gender justice lens to the work that we do. And we work to achieve policies that are grounded in the realities of our lived experience. We often talk about meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. We talk about advocacy and engaging advocates in leadership roles. And this is a foundational part of what we do. And finally, PWN envisions a world where all women living with HIV can live a long, healthy, dignified life, free from stigma and discrimination. We actually wish that for all people living with HIV. A group agreements today, just to kind of go over a little bit about how we would like to engage. We want to support everyone's participation, respect opinions even if you don't agree, minimize distractions if you have a chance, and most importantly, that this is a learning space. So feel free to ask questions, share thoughts without any concerns around ramifications or impacts on you, or if you're representing an organization or a coalition. The questions you ask won't reflect on your group. Our learning objectives, really by the end of the training, we're hoping that everyone will be able to consider how we process and meaningfully involve people living with HIV, both at an organizational level and a coalition level. We want to we want everybody to be able to identify the importance of engaging leaders living with HIV. So that's our meaningful involvement, or MIPA as we refer to it. We want to be able to define stages of organizational leadership, how people come in as volunteers, how we connect with them first when we have that first like, hey, hi, welcome, we would love to invite you in, to how do we move them up to being leaders that can run for political office, can chair a Part A planning council. There's a process, and by using this process and thinking about it in all of our work, it gives us an opportunity to really work to meaningfully involve people, to not gatekeep, and to be able to engage people however they come into our conversations. Finally, we want to be able to shape messages to different audiences of people living with HIV, different ways that we talk to people, depending on where they're at. I'll turn it over to you, Ebony.
Thank you. So we're going to first start with why leadership matters. Barb, I think you're controlling the slide. So what does a leader living with HIV look like to you and your organization? Please share with us in the chat. All these superhero leaders, I consider all of us superheroes. And SpongeBob is definitely a leader. He's a very interesting leader, but he definitely leads his tribe and a bunch of the children in the world. Next slide. But please share with us, what does living with HIV look like, leadership look like in your organization? Please share in the chat. So first we want to talk about PWN and disclosure in leadership. So of course, we believe all women living with HIV can be leaders regardless of their disclosure choices. Disclosure is a continuum. We want to make sure that opportunities exist for participation in planning and policy groups for women along the disclosure spectrum. We know that disclosure is our choice. Disclosure is a personal choice, and it takes, sometimes women live with HIV never want to disclose, and that's fine. And sometimes sometimes people are excited, they're okay with the disclosing immediately. And sometimes it takes a while for someone to get there, but it's our choice, whether we decide to or not. Disclosure can mean different things at different times and look different for each person. So we want to make sure that we respect people's choice when it comes to that. A leader can be effective whether openly disclosed or private about their status. It's always your decision, and it's up to you to make it. Next slide. So why building leaders living with HIV matters? Because we don't. That's it. It matters because we the bomb. But it more importantly matters because it empowers people to speak up for their needs. We all have different needs, and we want to make sure that we are building people up to speak up for what they need, because typically somebody else will need some of the same things. So when we build leaders, we build people to speak up. So, and in turn, that helps other people. It breaks down isolation and stigma, mobilizes subject matter experts for organization, provides feedback to state and federal officials, which is really important because we know that they don't know our lives. And in order for them to know what we need, we have to speak up to let them know. It honors our lived experience and gift of time. Builds expertise and leadership in non-traditional community-driven ways. And it doesn't rely on word of mouth. Gives experience leading to employment and economic justice. And it eliminates and breaks down gatekeepers in community. There is no one person that speaks for all people, but the more we build leaders, the more people can speak for themselves and help those that are in their communities.
The best picture, I'm just going to step in because we had a couple of questions about what a gatekeeper is, Ebony.
Oh, yes.
Chat box. So the best example of a gatekeeper is the picture of somebody standing in the door to a meeting room, holding on, keeping people out. And so gatekeeping can be physical, it can be emotional, it can also be unintentional. We have our one person who's living with HIV, we don't need anyone else. Or we have one voice and we don't need to include a whole bunch of other people because it means that it's going to get complicated or our meeting might go on. As you can tell, gatekeeping actually is problematic because it does mean that the diverse voices of people who are living with HIV aren't represented and aren't included. And so we always talk about, you know, when we're building up leaders, that we want to build up anyone who is interested in being a leader, that we don't pick and choose.
It also means that, I'm sorry, Barbara.
Go ahead. I was just going to ask you if you had anything you wanted to add.
Oh, no, I was going to say it also means that you can't keep someone out because that person makes you uncomfortable. You shouldn't keep someone out because a person makes you uncomfortable, because all voices are needed in order for us to work together and move together. So gatekeeping is pretty much, you know, of course what Barb said, but also anytime you're purposely keeping someone out of a meeting, keeping information from someone, because of, I feel like, a personal issue. A lot of us have that. So yeah, we have to check ourselves and evaluate ourselves when we're doing that. I don't want to invite that person to the meeting because that person always disagrees. Disagreement is good. We always disagree. People say when the women of PWS show up, you know they about to shake the table. So we definitely don't want to be those gatekeepers. So we have to examine ourselves when we hear ourselves saying that. Like, I don't want to invite this person to the meeting because that's going to make me uncomfortable. Or I don't feel like dealing with them today. Like, that's gatekeeping too. Next slide. Woo! From a drop of water to a waterfall. I feel like this picture is so powerful.
Ask another question. Oh.
I'm not sure what's happening. Is somebody asking a question or, okay. Somebody had came off mute by accident. All right, so from a drop to a waterfall. I feel like this is how we start. I know this is how I started. I remember just being me and not knowing that there were other women living with HIV in the world, period. And then I found out about these powerful women who were, you know, raising their voice and doing trainings and doing leadership development. And I said, oh, I want to do that too. And then I got introduced. I went to a conference and it was a whole waterfall of them. And it was amazing. So going from one drop to being a part of a group, a community, a network is super powerful. And this is why we want to build leaders, because we need leaders all over the place in order for us to get the rights that we need as people, women living with HIV, people living with HIV, and just human beings, period. We need to build leaders. Next slide. Building leaders Colorado style. I think we have some Coloradoans on here that's going to tell us about how they built leaders.
Yeah, and actually I can go ahead and take this slide because I think that, yeah. So building leaders Colorado style, you know, absolutely. When we're talking about the leadership ladder, this is a tool to move from being one single person who's working really, really hard to being a waterfall and having so many people who are able to show up and to present and to talk about what is important to people living with HIV in your state. And we've done this because we were able to get some really detailed training as a part of a project that we were working on for grassroots organizing. So in Colorado, we actually have used our leadership ladder to take people who have shown up at meetings and to actually engage them and move them up the ladder, so that we can talk about what they're interested in, what tools they might need for training, and everything else that you know, really is going to help us as a group by really involving and educating people. And so some of the things that we've been able to really accomplish in Colorado using our leaders as we've moved them up beyond really where people have thought that they were interested in engaging or where they thought that they were capable of engaging. We were able to, in 2016, change our law that actually specifically named people living with HIV and targeted them for felony convictions. We were able to change that law, and we had over 30 leaders living with HIV who showed up as a part of that. Many who, after that law passed and it was signed into to the statutes, said, I never thought that I would be able to do this. And it's like, that's what we do, is we take people, we bring them in, we welcome them in, and we help bring them on up the leadership ladder. We were able to do a lot of work around electoral organizing and integrated voter engagement and connecting with legislators. We were able to present a lot of testimony. And so really pretty much as we talk about building people up, you know, we just like to say that in Colorado, you know, we have a leadership ladder and we bring people on, and we want to make sure that everyone can step up and move up in a way that feels exciting and challenging and energizing. Because again, you know, when we think about that drop of water, none of us wants to be that drop of water. We instead want to be a part of that remarkable waterfall that is so powerful. We know that water in a waterfall can change the course of a valley by being collected. And so that's kind of the examples that we have in Colorado, is that we've been really able to work on that collaborative effort. So it is also important that as you're talking about the leadership ladder and engaging leaders living with HIV, that you think about, how do you talk to people who are living with HIV? And again, it goes back to a little bit about the gatekeeper. It goes back a little bit to inviting people in who might make you uncomfortable or who you find challenging. Those are the very people that you want to bring in and make sure that they feel involved. So it is important to make sure that when we're talking about equity, so that we're not just talking about services that are for, you know, the most privileged group or the people who are able to access healthcare, but that there is equity in services and in opportunities. That we share information and conversations, so that it's not, oh, you weren't, you know, you weren't at a meeting and so you don't get that information. information is power, and knowledge is power, and our people are power. So we want to share it as widely as possible and make sure that if people weren't able to join, that they know how to still get engaged. We want to make sure that people have training and support to develop. There is nothing worse than showing up at a meeting or presenting or standing at the podium when you don't feel prepared. As a group that really works to develop people, that is a responsibility as well. So we have a lot of meetings ahead of meetings to make sure that we know exactly what we're going to talk about, that everybody understands what the goal of the meeting is, so that once again, we can intentionally engage people and you don't just always hear from the same voices. And then finally, that you want to move beyond, especially when we're talking about stories, and this happens a lot with political people, but also as we're talking to organizations around programming, that we want to move beyond just our stories about transmission or diagnosis. Those are powerful stories and impact our lives, but we also live this rich fabric of lives. And this is also why it's so important to include so many people with so many different voices, because everybody's story is unique and is powerful and beautiful. And so we want to make sure that we go ahead and include everyone in their ability to tell that story to the degree that they feel comfortable. So moving on to our next part. So what we want to talk about is, as we're talking about leadership development, and especially as a group that is working on HIV criminalization, as coalitions that are often led by people living with HIV, or maybe not led by people living with HIV, as we gather people up, and after we have a group that comes from HINAC, we really want to go ahead and think about how we talk to people and how we include them. And Malcolm, it looks like you got your hand up. So before I go there, I will stop.
Yeah, I got a couple of things in the chat we might want to talk about. I know Susan was trying to ask a question, but it was more of a statement. I see gatekeepers indeed are unintentional. Some don't know that they're being gatekeepers. What was this? What? No, I was asking her what she wanted to discuss. So that's one thing. And then Chris Hoyle mentioned gatekeepers as a question mark. I know agitators, but what is the goal of this partisan?
Not sure exactly what Chris is asking about. What is the goal of this partisan? You know, I think that when we are talking about gatekeeping, it can go by many different names. Agitators are definitely not gatekeepers. I figure that agitators are the people who are pushing back and breaking down the gate. They're not the ones who are trying to lock it out and to keep people from being engaged, who perhaps are, you know, not the usual group that is invited to a meeting. And I'm holding up the air quotes because, you know, oftentimes we know that there's the same 3 or 4 people, maybe even the same 1 or 2 people who are invited to every meeting. It could be that the gatekeeper is the organization that's doing the meeting. And so when we're talking about the agitators are the people in the community who know that their voice matters, who know that they need to be able to share and to talk more about the impact, especially around HIV, criminalization, the impact that it has on their lives or their lived experiences.
Yeah, if I can add here, gatekeeping, I mean, it simply is what it says. Like if you standing at the door and you gate and you keeping somebody out, whether that's inviting, whether that is, oh, you know, we don't want them there. They're gonna ask the tough questions. So organizations do it. People live with HIV do it too, because sometimes and somebody said this in the chat, sometimes we don't know we're doing it. Sometimes we don't understand that just because I'm not in love, I don't like that person, I won't invite them to the meeting. But if it affects that person's life, if it's something about that person's life and it can affect their well-being and their voice needs to be in the room, your opinion of it shouldn't matter. They should be in the room if we're going to be fair. So sometimes it's, you don't recognize it until somebody said, oh no, I'm not inviting them, they cause too much trouble. Or, oh no, we're not inviting them because we're gonna have to figure out how to get them here. Or no, we're not inviting them because they're gonna want something to eat, they're gonna be hungry. And or we not inviting her because she got to bring her baby and her baby cry too loud. Like, all of those things are gatekeeping. You're keeping somebody out because of who they are or who they're not.
Mm-hmm. But here's another thing, I still didn't get to ask my question.
Susan, do you mind if we...
You can't hear me, can you?
Yeah, we actually can. You're breaking up a little bit. And do you mind if we...
Oh.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. So if you could type it in the chat, or that would be great.
Right.
So just a reminder, when we're talking about all of this presentation here, is actually talking about how we, as leaders living with HIV, work to develop leaders living with HIV. So in a bunch of other presentations, there will be how do you speak back to elected officials, how do you push back organizationally. These are tools that, as we form coalitions and networks, that we have found as leaders living with HIV, organizing others leaders and developing leaders living with HIV, have been useful for us. And so this might not be in any way an answer, but it is just a tool that again we have found useful. So I hope that helps frame that conversation a little bit different.
Hey Barb, one more question before we move on, and that is Susan, Cheryl Lamb asked, how do you break through the gatekeepers?
Yeah, how do you break through the great gatekeepers? That is a great question, Cheryl. The best way to break through the gatekeepers is to link arms with a whole bunch of people and physically and metaphorically push on through. You know, if you are, again, back to that single drop of water and don't have people to gather up and say our voice matters, then being a part of a network that can help support you, or really engaging with someone else who can be an ally or more of an accomplice is how you break down those gatekeepers. Because indeed, when we're talking about information and knowledge that's centered, we want to make sure that it's shared as widely as possible and that we can bring as many people who are living with HIV along. And I actually see Shannon has joined us. And Shannon, did you want to add anything? Shannon Robinson is one of our Colorado leaders, and we got Mary Jane as well. Is there anything that you want to add about breaking down gatekeepers or including and developing leaders living with HIV, especially using this leadership ladder tool?
Yeah, I think sometimes people are gatekeepers, like power sharing is scary, and folks feel like their needs won't be met if they're sharing power. And so I like to use some stuff from Intentional Peer Support, which is a program. I can send the link in one of the icebreaker chats or something in Whova. But I think finding shared values and goals, understanding different worldviews, creating connection, even if that's just you're sitting in the same room, you know, often being welcoming and saying just hi to somebody, because they may be doing some of that because they're scared or they're fearful or they're shy or they're nervous. If it's say an opposing person or say a city council person that's a gatekeeper or that kind of thing, phone, fax, email, carrier pigeon, airplanes, you know, do what you need to do to get your voice heard. Ask them out for coffee. That's one that often, or tea, that's one that often breaks down barriers. And, you know, I think for us in Black communities, organize around food, feed folks. Because when we're eating together and sharing that space, a lot of times that goes away. And like Barb said, lock arms and move forward.
Shannon, I think you hit the nail on the head. A a lot of people, I've been able to build a lot of leaders through food, because people either want to cook for you or want to eat with you. And if you can sit down and have a meal with somebody and make a connection, that's building a relationship. And that's exactly how you build leaders. And I also want to say that when I think about building leaders, I don't only think about building leaders in the community as far as people living with HIV. I also think about building leaders in the city council, in the state house, because we think of them as leaders already, and they are in their sense, but they're not leaders in our community. So we want to build them as leaders for us as well. So it's the same course of action. Like having them, like Shannon just said, food, coffee, a meeting, finding common ground, and then moving from there. That's how that's a great way to build leaders. Thanks, Shannon.
And since we've stopped and are having a chance to have a conversation, Susan, I just wanted to check and see if you wanted to try and ask your question again and see if we could hear you.
No, I'm still typing because Gatekeepers kept me out.
Susan, your video is, I think your Wi-Fi is lagging, so we can't really hear you.
Being snarky.
Yeah, your Wi-Fi is lagging, so we can't really hear you. Your video is lagging. But I heard you say you're still typing.
I think she just posted it. Let me look. Yeah, okay. I don't need a reminder, that's insulting. Okay. It is no answer. No doesn't help. Many of us in PA, in Pennsylvania, as leaders, have lived in Philadelphia, and there isn't really a powerful group there. We have women who live in rural areas now, and none will join our group because they don't gain anything from helping do projects in Philadelphia. I'm also not in Philadelphia, but I refuse to be left out, and the lived experience is not honored. So I'm seeking advice from people. For example, in Georgia, the women in the Rural Coalition who make great things happen. You think you're talking about Tammy Kinney?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So Tammy Kinney has a rural coalition in Georgia.
That's what I wrote. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if Tammy's. I don't know if Tammy's. I don't know if Tammy's on.
There is a powerful group in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Susan. I think that is a really great comment, which is sometimes there is a dynamic about rural areas versus urban areas. People who have been doing this work for a long time, people who are newly diagnosed, oftentimes there's an education dynamic. There also can occasionally be a dynamic that supports white supremacy, where some of the people who've been doing this work from the very beginning have been not identified as the leaders that they are, and it's easy to focus on some of the white folks who have been involved since the very, very beginning, and to forget Latinx and Indigenous people who have been leading for so long as well. And so absolutely appreciate that this is a difficult conversation, and it is hard when we talk about how do we involve ourselves, and how do we push to be involved, and how do we people that are gatekeeping are the people that we work with in coalition or have been our friends. And so it is a difficult conversation, and it can be painful as well. Some of what I'm seeing in the chat box here is talking about it being painful and feeling like our lived experience or our particular voices are not honored, and that is hard. I will just acknowledge that is hard. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for typing it in. I know it was a lot of typing, but I really appreciate that. So just as a reminder, as we're talking to leaders who are on this, and as well as who are in part of the HIV is not a crime academy, as Ebony said, when we have people that we don't want to invite to the meetings because they make us uncomfortable or for any other reason, it is most important that they're included, that we intentionally seek to involve them, because our collective liberation is dependent on all of us. And so whatever victory looks like in HIV advocacy, unless we get all of us there, it's not a victory. And so thank you for these reminders. They are powerful.
Barb, I'm sorry, I have something to say. I'm gonna let you move on, but I also have to say this because I went from a city to I moved from 2 different cities, and when I moved to the South, leadership building was more challenging than it was where I was from. And I had to step back and say, what am I doing wrong? How am I coming off? Because I come from a different culture, and coming from a different culture, I might be approaching this in the wrong way. I might be coming off as too aggressive, or I might be coming off in a way that this culture is not used to. So I had to step back and look at myself. And I will say in leadership building, especially like in rural areas and areas where you are not necessarily a part of that culture. And although, you know, these were black people in Dallas and I was with them, but it's still a cultural difference because I grew up north. I didn't grow up down south. So I had to reevaluate what I was doing and take a step back. And I've always learned that if I'm trying to build leaders and I'm having a problem doing it and I'm having a problem connecting with people, let me take a step back and see what I'm not doing right and try something different. I just needed to say that because sometimes we try and it's us too.
Any other thoughts or questions that people would like to raise? Because I don't want to just press on with the presentation if there are other things that people would like to talk about.
Barb, I mean, there's a great conversation going on in the chat. I don't know that it's anything that we need to bring up. I mean, I think people are conversing back and forth, mainly about rural versus in the city. For example, Mark Graham mentioned Susan and said, I deal with that here. People in Nashville think that that they are the say-so for all of Tennessee, plus living in a rural setting. People in urban settings don't care. And then Shannon mentioned how she sat in meetings with you and Carrie and just made her voice heard as the only rural person in the state. So, you know, it's a matter of, you know, in my opinion, and this is nobody in the chat, but in my opinion, it's people in rural areas have to act like, you know, personify what everybody believes that people in cities are like. They have to be aggressive. You have to be, you know, twice as aggressive. You have to just get in there and start talking and don't shut up until somebody tries to make you, because you know that you want to get your point across. And I think to Susan's point, that's how Tammy Kinney gets it done. You know, if anybody knows Tammy, she ain't shutting up. So.
And Shannon, it looked like you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I made some calculated moves, not only on phone conversations. I tried to get to know a little bit about people. So like Barb was always on these meetings I went to. So I started reading about Barb. And then when I finally met Barb, I was like, hey, I read this about you. And you know, that really sparked conversation. You know, did the same with Bob Bongiovanni at the state when he was at the state here. And then I purposely placed myself next to Carrie in a meeting one time that I had to travel to Denver because I knew Carrie was really, really feisty. And so am I. And I was like, well, Carrie can get in there first. And, you know, I just introduced myself and we sort of played off of each other, and then I didn't come off as the angry, mean Black lady then. Also, I did that with a lady named Sue Purchase in harm reduction, not knowing that her husband she and her husband had created the first legal syringe access program in the US, you know, so I just kind of lucked out. But I do, you know, I know my stuff. I bring stuff to the table, and I also research what's going on in urban areas that could be changed, or a little pivot that might work well in in a you know, rural setting. So often what was working in an urban setting, you know, I said, how can we pivot this and make it work in a rural area, adjust it a little bit, and boom, done. And then when it works, everybody wants to talk to you.
Thank you, Shannon. Ebony has now labeled you a strategic stalker, which, you know, indeed. And the part that I really want to make is that we need to make sure that all of us are at the table. You know, that all of us are at the table and all of us are supported at the table, because there have been a number of times where I have been at tables and have seen that there are people who wanted to say something who didn't know how to get something said in the meeting. And that is, we as seasoned advocates, Susan, you say you've got 28 years of activism, which is amazing. And so many others here on this call as well do. So this is this call that as we form our coalitions and as we do our work as coalitions, and as networks and as people living with HIV, that we identify who from the rural area or where people need to come from, where we need to involve people, and how, if we bring them in at one level, we can make sure that people are able to access us and the organization and help with the work, however they come in. So, are we good to go back to the presentation? I don't want to cut off the conversation, but
yeah, Barb, I think we're good. I think the chat box is clear.
So we have a couple of tools that we wanted to share with people around bringing in new leaders and helping them. And this first one is about you know, really where you see people and the different kinds of conversations you have. You have different kinds of conversations with someone if you're standing on the doorstep and talking, versus if you're in the entryway and talking, versus if you're in the living room, or if you're in the kitchen and you're sharing food and really talking. Those are different kinds of conversations. And so we wanted to just sort of remind people that when you have a new advocate that's coming in, or someone that you're just making a connection with, you know, if you feel a deep heart connection, inviting them into into the kitchen and sitting down and sharing food and talking about things in a deep way is great. It also can scare people off. So if someone is a new advocate and they're just dipping their toe in the water and they just want to learn what on earth this group is working on, or how they can get better services for a particular need they have, if you do that, you can overwhelm them. And so oftentimes using this kind of, you know, staging to think about what kind of conversation you want to have with someone can also help people stay engaged and not kind of scare them off. So, you know, on the doorstep, it's a less formal conversations. It's not written. It's, what are you interested in? You know, have you seen movies, or what's your music that you like, and how does it speak to your soul? And, you know, really kind of trying to just get to know each other in a way. Then when you're in the foyer, which is, you know, sort of the entryway, you know, then you're gauging interest. Are you still interested? Are you interested in being part of our HIV decriminalization movement? Yeah, do you want to learn about policy? Oh, okay, you don't want to learn about policy. Then that is one way to really be able to understand how to connect with people. If they're interested in just advocating for better services, and you keep inviting them to your HIV advocacy day, they're going to feel like you're not hearing them. not listening to what's important to them and not helping connect them. And so this is a way to kind of gauge how people can move through the world. In the living rooms, you know, that's where we sit down, have 5 or 6 people, have good conversations, talk about what's important to us. And then when you're doing this around advocacy and with new advocates, it is an opportunity to really talk about making deeper connections and sharing some of your story and hearing some of theirs. And then again, when we get to the kitchen, you know, it absolutely is about like sitting at the kitchen table is where you plan out your strategies, where you identify your targets, you have your talking points, and you have all of that in order that you're really working on it. And I know for a fact that Shannon has used this very effectively in connecting with her volunteers. And so Shannon, will you talk a little bit about this and how it has helped you when you are really trying to get people to engage in your work? Because I think it's a great example.
Sure. Yeah. Are you talking about me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, you know, I live in a very rural area. There's only one ASO for 40,000 square miles. So people often have to drive 4 hours or so. It's very stigmatized. You know, I joke, but it's not a joke. We legit live in, do y'all remember the Cerro Project? We don't live in Kansas anymore. That's our situation here. And so I had a person that I'd seen around at some other events, mostly at music venues, who wanted to talk to me. And we had been in some of the same spaces for other things, had a mutual friend, and this person, you know, last year during the uprising, we were looking for volunteers. And so this young person said, hey, you know, can I drive you around or bring you all water or whatever? And I said, yeah, sure. And this person now has turned into my business partner. So we've gone from sort of seeing each other in some little spaces to now we hang out 2 days a week and provide direct service at at mutual aid events to help register folks to vote, to talk to them about healthcare, to talk to them about living with HIV, houselessness. But the way that I did that was connecting with this person and their passion to disrupt houselessness. That's how that happened. And really encouraging that person not to be so shy, like giving them a chance to do things on their own without me micromanaging them, and really step up. And this person turned out to be just amazing, helping us coordinate like 70 phone banking shifts during the election season, and now is working on this week on some things that you know, they said, oh, I'm never going to go to policy meetings, they're boring. And now it's like, hey, when's that meeting for XYZ? So we just, you know, I just had them over to my stoop, talked, and that sort of turned into, now they legit are my kitchen snack fairy. She brings me snacks like once or twice a week. So you know, just creating that connection and some sort of mutual engagement that we could find.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, it's been really important, and this model about the doorstep, the foyer, the living room, and the kitchen comes from door knocking, and how you can actually door knock and have conversations with people who might be interested in joining you. Either these are not people living with HIV, but door knocking just with folks around progressive issues. And this is how you start conversations with them and can lean in and deepen these conversations as well. And it is, again, sort of think about the different kinds of conversations you have at those different places. And this can be used in volunteer capacity. It can be used in meetings to think about the different kinds of conversations and the level of conversations that you wanna have as well. If you would like to learn more about how to have these different conversations, how you structure them, how you as your team can think about them, we were able to work with a fantastic coach who helped us put on a grassroots organizing block party. It's a 6-part series that talks all about this, and you can find it on the PWN website. It talks about community organizing. It talks about community organizing all the way back to the civil rights era and even before. It talks about you know, the art and science of organizing, how you shape your message, how you tell your story of now that is compelling based on what you're learning from people. It talks about courageous conversations and how you can have really difficult conversations with people around really difficult topics. And so, you know, one of the really difficult conversations we might have as a group is about internal gatekeeping within ourselves. And how do we help identify that and call that out? Because I'm hearing that is something even here as a group we're identifying. These courageous conversations are a good place to start because it's about how you talk about it so that it feels like it's possible to have a conversation instead of feeling like you're being attacked or not heard, which is not good. And that's what we don't want to do as a community. And then finally, we have sort of like your list and how do you keep in touch with your list and stay in contact with your list. So those are all really good. You can find them on the PWN website. There's 6 series and they're put on by community. So at this point, we could actually have a discussion about sort of receiving services. How is someone new welcomed into your organization or your coalition? I'm going to just go ahead and kind of talk about these points and then keep moving so that we can at least introduce you to the leadership ladder, because that is a part of how we talk about how do we know where someone is and know how we can move them up the ladder, know what they need, know how we invite them to things so that we don't get into this gatekeeping where we say, I've got my 3 people I invite to everything and everyone else is just not so involved. So when we talk about this, we talk about how do you welcome someone in as an advocate even? How do you welcome someone in? How do you explain your organization? How do we tell them about the training opportunities that there will be, the leadership growth opportunities that there will be? How do we engage seasoned advocates? How do we keep people who are around for a very long time and have incredible wisdom? How do we help them feel valued and seen and acknowledged? And how do we keep challenging them, right? So that's the part that I always come back to is that, you know, there is so much work left to do that we need all of us, and we need all of us in different ways. And then finally, the question is what would you like to see change within your own coalition, within your own structure, and how might this conversation help support that? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to talk about leadership ladders. And when we're talking about leadership ladders, whoops, my goodness. Okay, we're all over the place. Sorry. I am just going to go ahead and stop sharing for a minute so I can get myself pulled back together and find what the leadership ladder looks like. So when we talk about leadership ladders, it is easy for us to think about it as an actual ladder. You know, if you're particularly graphic image inclined, that is what it can feel like. But really what we're talking about is, so you have these people that you've connected with, and I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. Tammy, I shared this link with you at the very beginning of our conversation. Can you repost it in the chat box so people can follow along or can have it as well? So when we're talking about a leadership ladder, we're not talking about a ladder other than when we talk about the fact that people come into an organization at one particular place, and we want to be able to move them along the leadership development scale as they're interested and as they are trained and as they have the capacity. So this is a tool that we've used in Colorado where we went ahead and we have 5 levels. We have level 5, which is where we have our newbies or our leads, people that we ran into that were interested. Shannon gets a lot of leads and newbies on marches and things like that, and we enter them in our database, and they are down here, like Jessica would be, for example, newly contacted, and we want to make sure that we go ahead and we connect with Jessica to try and invite her to a meeting, to share a learning opportunity, to do so very much with us. And so, you know, as we start off, we have our newest engaged folks, and we've got people who are connected to the work. They attend our meetings. Then we have our engaged leaders who are part of the getting the work done. You know, they show up at meetings and they help plan meetings. When we have marches, they help make sure that things are there. Then we have our very engaged leaders who've got the issues down. They can run the meeting, they can write the agenda. And then we have our most engaged leaders, and those are the people at the very, very top who we want to encourage to move on to new and different things. So like if you're a leader of a local organization, ask them to run for office. We need elected officials who look like us, who know our issues. And so this is about really kind of saying, great, you're at this level, how do we help you move forward? And you'll see that there is the contact information, there's people's areas of interest, because some people are interested in the really nerdy policy stuff. Some people are not. Some people are interested in everything. Some people just want to talk about services that impact, for example, folks who are going to high school or college who are living with HIV, and how they can get scholarships. That's really specific. If that's what they're interested in, that's great. There is a way for them to be involved. And then we have the engagement opportunities along the side. And then the final column is our contacts. And you want to go through and you want to contact everybody on your list at least once a month so that they don't forget about how important they are, forget about how excited you are for them to be able to engage, and can feel included in everything. So that is what a leadership ladder looks like. And we just kind of want to recommend that as a coalition or as a network, you think about doing this, because when we just store people's names in our mind, going back to this gatekeeping issue, it is easy to think of the people that we work with always and just keep calling on them. And they get burnt out, and it is gatekeeping, and other people don't feel included. So by using this, even though it feels like it is really a type A way to kind of keep track of people, it is pretty democratic, because it means that everybody who is a level 1, 2, or 3, for example, will be invited to a planning session for your next meeting. And so it's a really great way to be able to know who you have where. And as you're writing reports and things like that, it's really great to think about at the beginning of the year, who started off. So for example, in Colorado, a few years ago, we started off and we had 2 or 3 people at a level 1. We had no one at a level 2. We had lots of people at a level 3 and lots of people at a level 5. And so what we knew was that we needed to really start figuring out how to move people up. And so we intentionally said, okay, we're going to take all of our people who we've just connected, and we're going to call them and invite them to a meeting. And if they say they can't come, then we'll invite them to the next meeting until they tell us to stop contacting them, or they come. And that's the way that you really start kind of thinking about how do you engage with people in a way that feels intentional, not just slapdash, I happen to have thought of you just off the, at the spur of the moment, but instead, I see you, I see your value as an advocate, and I want to include you and be able to bring you along. Looks like Alan has their hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing with the leadership ladder and see if Alan, you wanted to ask a question or make a comment.
Yes, I'm sorry. We have really good representation on the planning council, except for in younger members. Men of color, and we're struggling to reach out to those people. Do you have any suggestions on what we might be able to do? The age group is like, 18 to 24. We have nobody on our planning council right now in that age group. So, do you have any?
Ebony, were you able to get Alan's point? He broke up a little bit on mine.
Yeah. Sorry, I think he was just saying that he's having a hard time. The planning group is having a hard time reaching out to young people, 18 to 25, and he was just asking us if we had any suggestions on how to do that. And I was kind of thinking about that, Alan. Young, like intergenerational groups are not easy necessarily to build all the time, especially when it comes to planning councils, because planning councils are so, they go by such order. A lot of times you guys planning councils don't stop and like explain everything that's happening because business keeps moving as usual. So it's not the funnest place for young people, but I would say some strategic things that I have done is like reached out to places or pretty much agencies, because on the planning council, if we want young people living with HIV, we have to like reach out to places where we know those young people are going to be. And I always try to find the one that is into politics. And if they're into politics, then I just invite them to a meeting, make sure they have everything that they need to get there. I sit by them if they come so I can explain things to them, because if you just let them be there and could be confused, a lot of times they won't come back because they're so confused. So I'll try to sit next to them and explain. And then I like take them out to lunch or dinner afterwards so we can have a further conversation about what happened so they'll understand and potentially come back. It's a lot of work to recruit young people into a space like planning councils, which is why historically I believe like as long as I've been on planning councils, it's always been hard to get young people on them. I don't know a state, and if there's somebody on here who is in a state and in a planning council that has a good number of young people, please come off and tell us your secret. But I don't believe there has been, like, I think that's a struggle across the board.
Thanks, Ebony. And yeah, absolutely. So I went ahead and I put the slides actually in the chat box, as well as the link to the leadership ladder. So people can go ahead and look at them. We've got our contact information here. So please feel free and reach out. I know we're at time, we're actually a little bit over. So thank you everyone for this really wonderful conversation. And it looks like there are quite a few. I'm hoping that the chat box has been recorded, because I for sure want to be able to go back and read over it. And I think that perhaps these will be starting points for a bunch of other conversations, because absolutely we want to make sure that everyone who wants to be a part is a part, and that all of our voices are heard. And absolutely, here are some other resources around making sure that we include people, both by the caucus, AIDS United, as well as Mob Lab, which is really great, and that is talking about people resources and how you involve people. And I think that all of these have been really great. And so I want to do a special thanks to the Groundswell for their coaching on helping Colorado develop these tools and help us share them with PWN, and also help us share them with you. And Ebony, I'll let you have the last word.
Thank you everybody for joining, and I'll see you around in the Hoover streets.
Yeah.
Thank you.